because there are clues in the words of Jesus in the New Testament about what he really thought of John the Baptist. And I'll start with the mildest one. He comes out with this slightly gnomic thing. A lot of his sayings are the kind of thing you sit there and go, oh, yes, and then you think, I wonder what it means. But he says, Jesus says, no man putteth new wine in old bottles. And you might think, well, actually, this is kind of like old dogs and new tricks and things like this. But actually, it's been pointed out by theologians that in those days, wine bottles were made of animal skins. And who do we know who wore animal skins? So it's now actually, no man putteth new wine in old bottles. It's kind of like, I'm the new kid on the block. Forget the old Baptist guy. Follow me. It's actually a dig at John. But much, much worse is to come. There's actually an astonishing line or two left in the Gospels. Although at first it reads like an enormous compliment. Jesus said, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Mind you, he then spoils it by saying, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. So you get a compliment, and then you get, oh, I don't know, forget it. But what did I tell you? What do the Mandaens, who hate Jesus, call Jesus? They call him son of a woman. It's a huge Middle Eastern insult. So let's look at that again. Among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. He that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. In other words, of all complete bastards, John is the biggest. And even the lowest of the low is better than him. Ooh dear, things have changed a bit, haven't they? Yes, or son of a bitch, you say he's calling him a son of a bitch. So, all right, I think we can establish that John and Jesus' relationship was not quite as we're led to believe by Christian propaganda. But how does this fit in with the fact that Jesus' career began with baptism by John? Is his own authority tied to this act in some way? And was John the one who is to come? Well, perhaps not, I think, under the circumstances. There does appear to have been a split. Jesus does appear to have begun as one of John's disciples. Many people did, of course, as we've seen. There were thousands of them. And in fact, you can tell by the names. For example, the young John, his name, John wasn't a big name, a common name among ordinary Jews at that time. And you get Joanna, one of Jesus' followers, a woman, seconds out, was obviously named that because she had started as a follower of John. Right. So, John, Jesus, didn't like each other. Their rivals didn't like each other. Mandaens hate Jesus. The Knights Templar spat upon and trampled upon a cross and worshipped a bearded severed head. What is going on? Was it just the fact that these guys were rivals, that all this hatred for all these years? It doesn't actually make sense, does it? Just rivalry. Okay, let's look at the death of John again, shall we? Was he really killed at the whim of some stripper? Even she was a stepdaughter of Herod. Josephus, as I'd said that he was actually imprisoned because he was too popular. They thought that there would be an uprising. In other words, John the Baptist was a top political prisoner. And the one thing you do not do with a top political prisoner, especially when there's thousands of his fans outside the door, is kill them. So especially if you're a Roman puppet, you have to answer to the Romans for the uprising. You certainly don't do it on the whim of some drunken lap dancer. So it doesn't work. Something else had happened. Something else had gone on. And, right, let's look at what happened immediately before John's death. Well, there's a bit that doesn't often get read out in church on Sundays in the New Testament. And that is that John, in his cell, sends a message out to Jesus and says, are you truly the one who is to come, or do we look for another? Now, this is the guy who's supposed to say, you're the one, I've waited all my life for this, you're the one. And all of a sudden, He's saying, oh, I don't know, actually. And it looks as if Jesus has heard something, John has heard something about Jesus, or he's discovered something, or, anyway, he doesn't like him. And we know he's appointed Simon Magus, of all people, as his successor. And I'm afraid I'm going to ask a fairly obvious question here. Who stood to gain by John's death? Not Herod, not even Salome, whatever her name was, really. Not even Salome, and certainly not the Romans. So who stood to gain? Well, what happened immediately after John's death? Jesus took over his following. Now, remember what the Mandaens called Jesus, among other things. They called him usurper of the cults, usurper of John's following. They called him the lying Messiah, practicing sorcery and treachery. All right, who stood to gain by John's death? And we know that Jesus had a disciple called Salome. It was a common enough name, but we do know that wherever she appeared in the New Testament, except at the very end when she appears by the cross with the other women, her name has been excised by the writers of the Gospels. It appeared originally and was taken out as if there was something suspicious about it. They don't want us to know that there was a Salome involved with Jesus. Okay, I'll just leave that lying there. What I want to say now is, okay, there are two things here. There's the Christ of faith, and there's the Jesus of history. And there may be some people sitting in the audience who are thinking, this is blasphemy, this is appalling, can she really be suggesting what I think she's suggesting? Even if there were all these people, generations of Templars or whatever, have believed this is awful, because Jesus is the Christ, he's God, and I believe that. There's nothing I can say and do to change that. Faith is immovable, and that's your personal, intimate relationship with Christ. But I'm talking about Jesus of history, and I don't think he was a very nice man. And I think he had a hand in John the Baptist's death, if only to do a who will rid me of this turbulent priest number, and maybe his followers had a hand in it. But this is a big story. This is why the Templars and others, Johannites, had to keep it down. They had to keep it secret. This is why they used symbols. This is why they were accused of blasphemy in the worshipping of John the Baptist. This is why they hate Jesus. And this is why, after all this time, as we enter a new millennium, it's time to air these things and discuss them. And you never know, it might be right. And if it is right, as we firmly believe it is, everything changes. Thank you.
They do their best. Of course, the point that Lynn was making toward the end of that is very, very important. The difference between the historical Jesus and the Christ of faith. As Christians, or those of us who might have ticked boxes saying C of E at some time in our lives, which I think is more a badge than anything else, or as members of the Jewish faith, or as members of the Muslim faith, the three great faiths that come from the same root, I don't think it particularly matters whether, and I won't mention Muhammad, otherwise I'll have a fatwa on me, whether any of the priests or people, historical people, were good, bad or indifferent. The value of it today is our belief structure and is what we believe, rather in the way that many years ago the relics that Yuri was talking about earlier were collected. I mean, I have seen personally 3 different heads of John the Baptist. I am aware of 7 Jesus' foreskins. Now, the issue there, it's amusing, but also it's, one can imagine, before the internet, before the news of the world exposing these issues, if I was today buying for my order John the Baptist's head in Antioch, and one of you was buying for your order John the Baptist heading Constantinople even, neither of us would ever know that the other one had it. Neither of our orders would ever know that the other had it. But the important thing is our order would believe that was the head of John the Baptist. And it is the belief structure that is important. And it is a belief in the Christian ethos. And I use that term with a small c, because that Christian ethos extends to most democracies in the world. And that is really what Christianity is about today, plus whatever you want to take from it and want to take from the old structure as part of your current belief structure. And that is really where we come from in taking a very loose Christian approach rather than a demonic fundamentalist Christian approach.